Shut up, Mark. Shut up, Mark. I'll fly out to kick your ass and come back.
I'm just gonna let you guys.
I'm not.
This.
You don't want that. You don't want that.
I went ahead and I just went live with it because why not? I think your guys' rapport is what makes the show the fastest show on the internet, Rob.
I think so. So.
From Mark and his countless tales of ED to Rob and his local hauntings in the Rochester area, I think we run the absolute gamut. So we're going to have a great show for everyone tonight. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Thursday, again, is your fastest night on the internet. We were talking about that earlier, only it was a different capacity altogether. We might go ahead and get some of that going on tonight, too, because I haven't had any self-deprecating humor in at least probably 15 to 20 minutes. So we've got a lot going on tonight. We have author Ed Ashton with us tonight. How are you doing, Ed?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on.
We provide a service, Ed. Usually...
Here it goes, Mark. Here it goes, Mark.
And that service is provided in 15 minutes or less. That's our guarantee of quality for a show like Night Terrors.
You did state that many women have said you wouldn't last 15 minutes. So,
no, and I proved them all right, too. Why prove people wrong when you can prove them right? We're going to have a great time tonight. We're going to talk to Ed about his books, the inspiration behind his books. We're going to talk about Rochester, New York, because we've got two Rochester... Can we just call you indigenous Rochesterans?
Rochester.
More like a recipe than an actual people.
I prefer 585.
585.
Yeah, because right next door to 585 is 315, and you don't want to be a 5 if you can help it.
Do you guys have any signs that you can throw down? Any kind of hand signs for 585?
I don't think so. It's kind of a lilac leaf. Kind of a lilac is our deal. That's what we got.
More like a puppet show.
Not a very big gangster, I guess.
I don't want to trust anyone who tells me that they can do a puppet show. What the world are you doing over there, Mark? Those fucking lobster claws.
Doing a puppet show.
Those are lobster claws. That's not a puppet show. Clickety clack clack, Mark, with the lobster claws. So what we always do every week is we devote a few minutes to our own misery of how our week has been. So, Rob, how has your week been?
My week has actually been quite good. Enjoying the last couple free days of summer here. Getting ready to go on vacation. We just got back from a vacation. Ready to go on another vacation coming up here. We're going out to Cape Cod. Everything's flowing along nicely. I forgot to tell you. Again, we talked about this beforehand. Got to bring it up now. Some great interview knowledge from Nicolas Cage today.
All right, and apparently we've learned that his inflection is not regional, but purposeful. Am I correct?
Right.
Can you lay down some knowledge on Nicolas Cage's purposeful voice inflection, Rob?
He said that all great actors have distinctive speech patterns, so that is why he delivers his lines the way he does, because he is a great actor.
Well, I think, first of all, it's great for Nicolas Cage to give himself that kind of credit. I think that's wonderful.
He's right up there with Walken and Brando.
You know who I think we need to add to that inner circle? When I look at actors that I really like, I always have to bring up, I love Paul Giamatti. Does anyone else love Paul Giamatti as much as I do?
Paul Giamatti is pretty good, yeah.
Sideways was a great movie.
See, it's funny. That was a movie that I put off watching forever because I worked at a Suncoast when that came out on DVD, and they kept playing the trailer on loop in the store. And I was just so annoyed by it that I never watched that movie. And that friend of mine's like, no, you have to watch this. It's hilarious. I finally did, and I really enjoyed it.
When my kids were little, Big Fat Liar with Amanda Bynes and he played sort of the bad guy, adult, foil. Very funny, very, just a great actor. And then, how many other little bit parts that he shows up in that you just, he steals whatever scene he's
and then
in.
the ones where he actually gets a little more screen time, like Shoot 'Em Up, for example.
I was just gonna say I loved him in
Paul
Shoot 'Em Up.
Giamatti was great. If you haven't seen it yet, it's currently on Netflix. I think it's only been on Netflix now for about 2 or 3 weeks. But Gunpowder Milkshake with Karen Gilliam, who was in she's in the MCU. She was also one of the companions on Doctor Who. But she's joined by Lena Headey, a bunch of other great actresses. But yeah, Paul Giamatti plays sort of the quintessential mob guy in it, but really, really good. I think of Paul Giamatti. So we're welcoming Ed Ashton. Ed Ashton is an author. Ed Ashton is also now. Are you a native Rochester resident, Ed?
No, I'm not. I'm actually from West Virginia originally.
Ooh, where in West Virginia?
A town called Fairmont, sort of right in the middle of the state.
Now we've visited West Virginia, and it seemed like a particular war had not quite ended there.
Yeah, it's an interesting place.
I have an important question.
But they're still fighting the British down there?
Yes.
Somebody.
I didn't see a lot of red and blue
question.
on their flag.
I have to ask
should we let Rob ask his question, or should we just keep talking over him?
It's a West Virginia question, and if you guys don't know what it is, you don't know me.
All right, I'll allow it.
I'm not going to like this, am I?
No, you will. Have you ever seen or heard of sheep squatch?
I have not seen nor heard of sheep squatch. No.
Okay.
No.
It is apparent.
A big West Virginia thing.
All right. Well,
What's
it's
that?
been a great show. Good night, everybody.
That's a big West Virginia thing.
Okay.
I've not seen sheep squatch.
It's just it's one of my favorite cryptozoological things because it's like 2 counties in West Virginia. Like Mountain Monsters has done episodes on it, all these other places. And then it turned up in a video game that Mark should know all about.
Oh, yeah, Fallout 76.
And, so sheep squatch is just one of those things that, if I hear West Virginia, I got to know. I just want to know if it's real. That's all.
Yeah, I can tell you that. I mean, I could tell you about the blue people. They're real.
Well, I'm instantly intrigued.
Okay. Me too. I'm ready.
Besides it sounding like about 76% of my prom night.
Down in the West Virginia Kentucky border, there are people living back in the mountains who are they're blue, like their skin is blue. They're very insular. They keep to themselves. As you can imagine, they don't really like outsiders coming in. But every once in a while, if you're down there, like around the New River Gorge area and over towards Kentucky, there you'll see one of them coming into town or something, and it's interesting.
Yeah, so this is like a verifiable clan.
Oh yeah. No, this is a real thing. Like this is something you can Google and see pictures of them. They're not like Smurfs.
Right.
They look more like. Have you ever seen a drowned person?
Yes.
They're kind of blue skin tone. It's like. I am insinuating nothing.
They aren't protecting their village from a government entity, are they?
No. I think they're mostly protecting their village from people making fun of them and being mean to them.
Is it genetics? Is it?
That's a point of controversy. Most people think it's an inbreeding thing, but I've also heard that it's from having too much copper in the water in the area. You know, like you wear a copper bracelet, your skin turns kind of bluish green. You get too much copper in the water. I don't know.
So it's very possibly the home episode of X-Files going on over there.
Yeah, it could be.
Real mom from
X-Files.
under
The home
bed.
game.
Yeah.
Whenever you need breakfast.
Well, I think you got to too kind of I think they got to kind of go together, because if they're not branching out and people aren't going in, then kind of one leads to the other, right?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
So,
it's true.
I mean, personally, and this is weird for me saying so, but I've always liked the idea of sort of these isolated communities, because I start to feel like, especially since the internet has been so prevalent in sort of dictating what stores we have, what kind of merchandise we buy. Like, I felt that America's become more and more homogenized. And to me, this is like the last piece of Americana. It's like small inbred communities. It's like we need to embrace these from a distance, but we need to embrace these communities and say, flourish, blue people.
Well, you remember when we were out in New Jersey, we always heard of some place called Midgetville.
Again, it's a Jersey legend. I don't know if it exists or doesn't, but it is a Jersey legend. Growing up, I heard about it all the time.
Well, the same as talking about like self-isolation, probably maybe due to inbreeding, but northern New Jersey was also home to the Jackson Whites. The Jackson Whites was also a very popular, and I guess that at one point in time we could call it an urban legend, but there's a lot of people to verify that they had seen the Jackson Whites, they had interacted with them. And apparently, their children were not allowed to go to public school. They were very, very defensive when it came to, getting close to essentially where they were living. So there was a lot of talk about Jackson Whites. But again, it's like, for me, this is like the last piece of Americana we can cling to. It's like the big ball of twine, small inbred communities. I don't want either to go away. It's sort of like, it's like a rich modern folklore.
A friend of mine's parents just visited the world's tallest filing cabinet.
Wow.
There's a small town not far from where Ash is at called Casey, Illinois, that is the home of a lot of world's largest things. Like, they got the world's largest rocking chair, the world's largest mailbox, the world's largest wooden shoes. There's all kinds of stuff. It's a really weird little town. If you go to the
diner and talk to Edith there, she will tell you that the world's largest asshole actually works at the auto mechanics place right across from the post office. So apparently they've got a lot of claim to fame in the world's largest. So, Ed, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of... We always hear that writing is a very compulsory thing. Was that for you? And if so, or if not, what was sort of the genesis of you saying, hey, I want to write fiction?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would lean more towards the compulsory end of things. I was a reader from the time I was very small, and I wanted to make the sort of stories that I was reading. I wanted to make the sort of stories that I like to read. Actually, I wrote my first novel when I was 12. I wrote it in longhand on 200 pages of loose leaf notepaper. I gave it to my dad. He read it. He sat me down and told me it was hackneyed and derivative, and that if I actually wanted to be a writer, I better damn well work on my craft. Which is a tough lesson to hear for a 12-year-old, but he wasn't wrong. I mean, he wasn't wrong. And I mean, honestly, it's really great that I was growing up when I was and where I was, because I could see something like that happening today with the 12-year-old kid, and the dad takes it and dumps it on Amazon for sale and says, you did such a great job, and pats him on the head. And then that's following you around for the rest of your life. This thing, like, I still have that. I still have that 200 pages of loose leaf notebook. It's at the bottom of a locked cabinet in my closet. And nobody but my dad's ever seen it. Nobody's gonna until I'm dead. Because it's like, he was right. It is hackneyed and derivative.
And what was your father's background? Like what was your father's occupation at that point?
My dad's a professional musician. Okay. So he was a composer, and he played jazz, and he played in the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera. Gig to wherever you could get him, I guess. It's kind of a tough gig being a sort of professional trumpet player, sort of itinerant professional trumpet player. That's mostly what he did.
Like, there's a part of me that almost wishes he was like a prison guard, because I would have loved to have heard like that review come from someone that wasn't really in a creative circle. Like, yeah, my dad fixed transmissions, and he said my manuscript was highly a derivative. Like, somehow it's like it's more cinematic that way.
So have you read this? Have you read this 200-page tome?
Yeah, have you
recently? And maybe see if there's anything you can change and fix to actually make it into a decent story.
God, no, there's absolutely no help to be had for this. I mean, like I said, I was 12. I mean, it's just, it's childish stuff. I mean, the first professional piece that I sold, I was 20. And even that, I can't, like, it makes my stomach hurt to look at it. I can't read it at this point. And somebody actually paid me good money for that. I got $99 and a giant pizza for that, which is honestly my favorite paydays that I've ever had as a writer. It's painful to look at that story today. I can't do it. You got to get to where I was, 25 or 26 before the stuff that I was writing gets decent enough that I can actually go back and read it and not feel bad about myself.
Right, but those are all the building blocks. Those first 4 or 5 years were the building blocks that got you to where you were at, 25 or 26, where you feel that you could, say that, okay, I like this piece, but those other pieces were the ones that got you there. Those were the ones that taught,
Yeah, you have to go through that stage. It's like a larval stage. You have to go through being, as any kind of an artist, you have to be terrible for a long time before you get to be good. There's almost nobody who just, out of the gate is, wow, this is awesome work. I mean, as a musician, as a writer, as a visual artist, it doesn't matter. You have to go through those stages of producing garbage before you can produce anything good. But knowing that that's a necessary part of the process doesn't make it any easier to go back and look at the really bad stuff that you produced when you were younger.
So what do you think Stephanie Meyer, author of Twilight, does?
I don't want to offend any Twilight fans.
Oh, please offend
Don't
them.
worry, they're not listening to us.
Honestly, I mean, you don't need to pull her out. I mean, there are people who wrote fan fiction of Twilight. I mean, that's what Shades Grey was. It started as Twilight fan fiction.
Series.
And in 2015, the year that my first novel came out from HarperCollins, 50 Shades of Grey was 50% of all the books sold in North America.
Wow.
All the books sold in the entire continent of North America, half of them were 50 Shades of Grey. And that was Twilight fanfic that they went through and just sort of, okay, let's make him a business guy instead of a vampire, because otherwise we'll have copyright problems.
So should we just turn off all the lights and just get out at this point?
I've had that thought. But, I mean, it's okay for people to like things that aren't highbrow art. There's nothing wrong with that. People like what they like. I mean, there are plenty of people who probably say the stuff that I write. I mean, I know for a fact that the woman who was my mentor when I was in college, she's not a fan of the stuff that I'm writing today. I have nothing but love and respect for her. She taught me almost everything that I know about being a writer, but she's somebody who feels that sort of contemporary literary fiction is the only kind of fiction, and anything that's not that is, it's just trash. And it's fine for her to have that opinion. That's, we all have our opinions about what's good art and what's bad art. And I'm not going to look down on somebody because they happen to like 50 Shades of Grey. That's a personal choice.
Absolute trash, Ed. Absolute. We're talking like you need like a shoehorn and a jackhammer to get it off the bottom of the barrel. That's how trashy I like some of my stuff sometimes.
Ash likes to roleplay 50 Shades of Grey, but he likes to play the female character.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Here we go.
And if I get paid, let's say $60 an hour to do that, why not?
Sure. Everybody's got their thing.
I just did a presentation at a winery, and It's a little winery in a little town called Appleton, New York, and
is it a little complainy or is it a little winery?
Wow.
Zing.
The lady that owns the winery, she has
laugh, Mark. Don't encourage me. Don't you dare.
She has a T-shirt that says, "Do you know what the best wine is? The wine you like." You know, and that it's no truer words have ever been spoken because, you know, I've heard people say, you know, it's a 1982, and then other people taste it and go, you know, and the other person's like savoring it, and other people go to, you know, the grocery store and buy a Franzia wine box, and you know they're happy as hell. So
I think we can all though consensually agree that Gilbert Gottfried reading 50 Shades of Grey is one of the best things to ever happen.
That's high art. Yes, that is low art, and make it's a circle. You get all the way to the bottom, and then Gilbert Gottfried takes it back up to the top.
You know, if I wasn't so desperate in my prior dating life, I would have loved to have found a girl that I maybe didn't care that much about, and then would try to seduce her playing Gilbert Gottfried, narrating, just because I want that kind of rumor to circulate about me. Where somebody would see me, there's hush whispers, and I'm like, they're talking about the 50 Shades of Grey thing. I know they're talking about the 50 Shades. I wish I had enough, you know, I guess confidence to have been able to pull something like that off. Never happened, but
well, that's the sort of things that follow you.
Now, if you had to pick a favorite author that you had out there currently active today, who would it be?
That's a really tough call. I'm a huge fan of David Brin. Although he's like, actually his last book, I had a rough time with it. You know, I really like John Varley. Although like he's had some rough patches too. It's really difficult as somebody who, when you're somebody who's putting out a ton of work, it's really difficult to make it all sort of consistently great. You know, Werner Vinge has 2 absolutely like all-time classic novels and 3 that are sort of like barely readable. It's tough to be really consistent. So I feel like I have more favorite books than I do have favorite authors, to be totally honest.
And do they kind of feed into how you write, or how you do you draw inspiration from that, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's every author will tell you that. You know, they sort of talk about like your ice cream tastes it tastes like whatever it's sitting next to in the freezer, right? I mean, you have that same sort of bleed over with writers. If I've been reading a particular author, yeah, you try to pick up what you can in terms of tricks that they pull, in terms of the way that they structure plots, in terms of, you know, the way they turn a particular phrase. I always try to take the best out of everything that I read and try to incorporate it into my own work. I mean, that's one of the ways to. That's why anyone who says, I don't have time to read because I'm always writing, it's not a writer. You can't, if you're not constantly reading, you can't be a writer, because that's how you sort of refill the well of words in your head that you're pouring out onto the page. It can't all just come from inside of you. You have to be drawing from the larger culture and from the other writers around you.
Now, I've read an interview with you, Ed. See, this is the kind of crack research team we have here at Night Terrors Radio. And you would talk that sometimes your inspiration actually comes from a singular scene that you have, and that you spend time trying to get there.
Yeah, that's a lot of the things that I start with are just sometimes even just an image. Sometimes even just one thing. So, for instance, I had a story in Analog last year. It was called Wolves, and that started with a single line, which was a lone wolf house in the distance, which sounds really cheesy. And that's like a cheesy line, but it was stuck in my head. And I'm like, I know I can build something around this. And at the end of the day, the story actually had like nothing to do with that line, but that line was actually the culminating line of the story. And it took me 4,500 words to get to that line. And the 4,500 words were probably all better than the ones that made up that line that I started with, which, like I said, was kind of almost like a cheesy cliche. But yeah, that's really common for me. I'll start with a picture or a scene or a snippet of conversation, something like that. And I try, particularly when I'm working with short stories, it's a little harder to do that with a novel. With a novel, you need a bigger structure to build on. But with short stories, a lot of times it's just one piece of inspiration.
I think that's an interesting way to work. I write occasionally. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I do write. And I tend to follow some of those same sort of roadmaps where a lot of it really just is there's this scene that I'm wanting to see played out. There's this piece that I'm connecting to. And really, I don't really have a beginning or an end. It's how can we get to this scene? How can we make this scene, be something that we can sort of surround with a story that maybe is, interesting enough that when people get there, it sort of makes sense. So I like that approach. I find that sometimes a little more inspired than just sitting down and going, talking dog. That's where it's at. And you're writing a story about a talking dog because all of a sudden this is sort of, where you're going with it. But this idea of having maybe a scene that might be now, and I'll ask this question, do those scenes take place at any point along the timeline? Is this something where usually it's toward the end, or is it something that's just a point of inspiration? It's just a push pin on the map.
Actually, for me, it's more often the beginning. Sometimes it's the end. More often, it's the beginning. So for instance, my first novel, 3 Days in April, started with a scene in a bar. A guy going to a bar to order a drink, and he turns around and bumps into a woman and knocks her drink out of her hands, and then she decks him. And that I thought that was like a funny, interesting little interaction. And where do I go from there?
I actually read that opening the other day. I was like, oh, they got a sample on Amazon. I was reading that. That was fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, but that's where it's. I had no idea where that book was going when I wrote that. Essentially, I wrote that first chapter. I had no idea who the character was going to be. I had no idea what the plot structure was going to be. Nothing. I just I completely.
So when you're doing a novel, you just sit down and just start typing and see where the keyboard takes you, or do you do a whole outline? I want to hit this point, this point, this point in this order.
Well, I mean, it's been different for the different books that I've done. So I've written in the last 6 years. I've written 5 full-length novels. So my most recent one, which is Mickey 7, that's this one, which is coming out in February. That one I actually started as a novella. So it was about 25,000 words, which I wrote in sort of that way. I just sort of went with it. And then I gave it to my agent, and he showed it around, and he talked to a few editors, and they said, look, we like this, but a novella is a really tough length to publish. There's just not a lot of people buy them. You need to make this a novel. And so I needed to go from the 25,000 words that I had, which basically was the full arc of the story, to 80, 90,000 words, which is what sort of an adult novel needs to be. And for that one, I did go through and I wrote up a full detailed outline, because I knew I needed to work to the appropriate length within the structure of the story that I already had. And so I had to be very meticulous about how I detailed that and how I sort of stretched things out, so it didn't affect the pacing, and I didn't introduce elements that I wouldn't be able to resolve at the end of the book.
Right.
But 3 Days in April, I had no plan at all. 3 Days in April, I just started writing, and what came out, and the story sort of formed itself in my head as I went.
No, I'm digging 3 Days in April. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it, and I'm really enjoying it. Going on, the last trip, we were kind of reading, a little bit about Mickey 7 and like the little description of it. And I tell you, I'm intrigued. I'm seeing, how it works, how the whole thing goes. And I was wondering can you give us like a 2-minute or 3-minute, lead in to what Mickey 7 is, so that.
Yeah, sure. Mickey 7 is one of those books. It's actually started with an idea. And the idea is basically built around what's called the teletransport paradox. I don't know if you're familiar. It's kind of a trope in science fiction, honestly. People have been thinking about it since the 1700s. But the basic idea is this. As a thought experiment, imagine that when you go to sleep at night, you don't just go to sleep, you die. You die, and the person who wakes up in your bed the next morning is a totally different person. He looks like you, he talks like you, he's got all your memories. He still loves chocolate, hates EDM, whatever you like and don't like. But he's a completely different person. You're dead. And he only lives for that one day as well. And when he falls asleep, he's gone. And it's the next morning. Is there any way that you can prove to me that that's not what actually happens? Would that make any difference in your life? If that is the truth, is there any way you'd be able to know? And the answer is no. I mean, I think for most people, the answer is no. And so that raises a question. So imagine that, which, this is something that people are already talking about doing, the whole transhumanism movement, where we're going to upload our brains to the cloud, right? And then you'll be immortal. Imagine we're actually able to do that. We're able to sort of transcribe all of your thoughts, all of your feelings, your emotions, and upload that into a computer. And so that gets done. They put the helmet on your head and read all your thoughts, load it up into a computer. They're done. And then they turn to you and say, okay, you've been uploaded, you're immortal on the machine. You're still sitting there with the helmet on your head. But there can only be one of you, so we're gonna have to kill you now. Are you okay with that? Because you're immortal, you're on the cloud. Do you mind that you have to die now? So that's basically that's the premise of Mickey 7. So Mickey 7 is about a guy. He's an employee, basically, sort of a conscripted employee on a mission to colonize another planet. And his role in this mission is the mission expendable. And the expendable is the guy who has to do all the sort of dangerous to suicidal jobs that come up on this sort of extremely hazardous sort of mission.
The red shirt.
Yeah, right. Except that his sort of body patterns and his brain are stored on servers on the ship, and every time he gets killed, they basically print him a new body and dump his brain into it, and so he gets resurrected. So, and they've indoctrinated him to believe that this is immortality, that he's not really dying. It's just, like I said, it's just like no different than going to sleep and waking up the next day. Until his seventh iteration goes missing, and he's presumed dead, and they pull the next iteration out of the tank, but he's not dead, and he makes it back, and there can't be two of him. And so this obviously creates, number one, a big problem for him, because he has to hide the fact that there are now two of him from this really small isolate. There's only 170 humans on this entire planet. And they live in a very small sort of contained habitat. He has to try to hide the fact that he's actually a multiple now, that there's two of them. And at the same time, he's going through this sort of crisis of identity, because he's believed that every time he comes out of the tank, it's still him. And he remembers all the way back to being Mickey 1. But now there's this other guy running around, and it's clearly not him. It's a completely different person. And they actually don't even like each other very much, as it turns out. And so this obviously sort of throws his entire worldview into question. And so that's where it starts. And then, things get complicated from there.
They get complicated from there.
Yeah.
So that's not the complicated part. That's the
Right.
simple
I
part.
followed it,
Now,
but
do you have a science-based or clinical background, Ed?
Yeah, actually, I'm a cancer researcher by day. It's what I do now. I've done so. Like you guys have read a little bit of 3 Days in April, right?
yep, I have.
So one of the pieces of advice that they give you is when you're like beginning as a writer is write what you know, right? That's basically what 3 Days in April was me writing what I know. So I'm a clinical researcher. Prior to that, I actually worked for the government. I worked for the parts of the government that you're not allowed to tell people what you did for them or where you were or what you did.
The post office.
Yes, yeah, something like that.
Because that's a
So
federal defense
I worked. Yeah. So I worked with sort of national security related stuff, surveillance related stuff. So I have that background. I have the medical background, the biomedical background. I've been doing this for 20 years now.
So aliens, are they real?
That's an interesting question. So when I was with the government, so the way security clearances work with the government, I don't know if you guys have ever had to deal with this. They have what they call stovepipe clearances, right? So once you get up to a certain level of clearance, which is it's called TS, which stands for top secret.
That's not what
Anything
it stands for
beyond
OnlyFans,
that,
by the way. Yeah, and they're not giving my $80 back either.
Yeah.
So if
I can't
anybody
help
has
you
an
with that.
email that I can reach, that would be fantastic because I need that $80 back. You continue, Ed.
Anyway, if you want to go beyond that in the security system, you get into what are called stovepipe clearances, which means you can learn more, but only about a very, very narrow area. And there's 6, at least there were at the time that I was in the system, there were 6 different stovepipes within my area. And I had 3 of them, which is more than most. And I did a lot of business. I've been out to Nellis Air Force Base. I've been around Area 51. There's no aliens there. But I also did a lot of work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And there's a building on Wright-Pat that I could not get close to with my clearances. And I knew people who had 2 of the 3 that I didn't have, and they couldn't get anywhere near that building either. And so there's a lot of speculation about what was actually going on in there, because among us, we covered almost everything that the U.S. government knows or was allowed to know. And none of us knew anything about what was going on in there. So that was kind of the running gag, was that's where they're really keeping the aliens.
They have a hangar number associated with it at all. Somewhere between 17 and 19.
Now we're going back into the Nicolas Cage thing. Go back to Book of Secret, National Treasure, or whatever it was.
National Treasure, yeah.
Yeah. And they had the president's book that you had to have the special code and all the different things. And we're getting into that kind of territory now because, they're releasing all this video footage now and all these, audio tapes of all the encounters. And, at some point in time, somebody had to know something more than even is being said now.
I mean, based on my experience with the national security apparatus, I will tell you that we're not being told everything that people know. I mean, the government is very good at holding on to secrets. And when they read me out when I left, they gave me a PowerPoint presentation. They talk about like bullet points, right? Literally, they had the bullet points of the things that they would kill me for were little bullets. Like the ones where I just go to jail were the regular dots, and the ones where they would kill me were literal bullets. Like if you talk about this or this or this or this, we will literally kill you. So
yikes.
They're good at keeping things undercover. The government is
Well,
very
like a little legend, like at the bottom of the page, that had all that iconography on it.
It was explained to me very clearly what everything meant. They were very, very clear that they didn't want me talking about certain, and to me, some of the things seem kind of silly. I can't tell you what they were, but they seem kind of like For instance, like the clearances that I had, right? One of the clearances that I had was B. I had B clearance. Now, B stands for a word. I can't tell you what the word is because the word is classified, but it's a nonsense word. And that relates to a different program that has nothing to do with the word. So you've got the letter, which is the only thing that you can actually say. You've got a nonsense word that you can't even say what the nonsense word is to someone who doesn't have B clearance. And then what B clearance actually admits you to know, which is another layer down.
Can we try to guess the word?
Go for it. You never will.
Is it baloney?
Son of a bitch. Hi.
First one out of the gate. Yeah, it's hard to believe that our government would keep anything from us. I mean, I don't buy it.
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
It's crazy.
Everything. They're the most transparent group on the planet.
Let's speculate for just a second. Not go too deep down the rabbit hole here.
Are we going back to guessing what B means?
No. Or Nicolas Cage. Are we going back to Nicolas Cage?
Oh my God, this is going to become a thing with you, Rob, isn't it? Where you bring up Nicolas Cage at least once an episode.
That's part of the shtick.
Now it is.
But speculating about like some of the concepts that you're talking about, for example, Ed, to be able to upload a consciousness, and then effectively what we're doing is we're sort of finding that little jumping off point, or that point where maybe we've got a backup, so that we can continue from that backup point. Yep. Do you think that is, because a lot of people have, openly talked about the fact that there is a high probability that we are maybe even living in a simulation. Would we be able to live with that knowledge? Do you think that the human psyche is capable of knowing that is how we live? Or do you think that it would essentially just destroy us, having that kind of knowledge?
I mean, that's an interesting question, because as you say, there's some evidence that's actually the case. So for one of the other things that I do is I teach quantum physics. Okay. And if you look at the quantum state of protons in a magnetic field. Okay. A proton has a magnetic field, right? And it rotates. So if you put it inside an external magnetic field, you would expect it to behave like the needle on a compass within the Earth's magnetic field, right? Line up and sort of the north end of the proton magnet sort of points along with the north end of the magnet that you've got. And that's essentially the concept behind magnetic resonance imaging, is we sort of line up all the little protons inside your body, make them all point in the same direction. But they don't point directly along the line of the magnetic field. When you go into an MRI machine, your protons, every one of them lines up with that magnetic field, but they line up at 54 degrees, 44 minutes off due north, or 54 degrees, 44 minutes off due south. One or the other. It can only be one or the other. It can't be anywhere in between. It's physically impossible. It can only be upspin or downspin. Now, why would that be? What is a possible sort of physical explanation for the fact that you can be here or you can be here, you can never be anywhere in between? One explanation is that the person who coded the system decided to only allocate 1 bit to code the spin state of these protons. Because who's going to look that deep, right? Nobody's going to look at the spin state of these protons. I'm not going to waste a whole byte on that. That's a lot of code. I'm just going to code it with 1 bit, so it'll be a 0 or 1. That is one explanation for that sort of quantum phenomenon, and there are a bunch of other sort of things like that, that where reality becomes quantized if you look at it at a fine enough level.
Equate that with stuff like double slit theory and observed state too, right? That there's just something that doesn't quite gel with theoretically how it should work.
Right. Now, if you talk to theoretical physicists, what they'll say often is, well, you're trying to make a Newtonian analogy to something that's actually occurring in quantum land, and really it's only quantum mechanical equations that describe what's really happening, and you just don't have the brain to understand the quantum mechanical equations, and that's why this seems off to you. And I mean, that's certainly possibly true as well. You know, like I said, I'm not saying this is definitive truth, but it is, you know, it's interesting and suggestive to me of the possibility that something like that's going on.
Now, I read a paper once, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it was about how that fit into like the doppelganger theory, that there, you know, because of quote unquote so many bits or so many bytes to program, at one point in time they just said, yeah, copy this one, copy that one, and that like there was a classroom. I want to say it was in Russia somewhere, that a woman walked. The teacher was a woman. She herself walked into the classroom as she was already writing on the board, and the two of them were like coexisting in front of each other. And supposedly, I know, but supposedly it fell back to what you were just explaining, was that, you know, the amount of code used to write this Truman Show that we're in, you know, is that a possibility?
Actually, something very similar to that happened to me when I worked at the Naval Research Lab, which is our secretary. I left her in our office and went over to the cafeteria and ran into her again over at the cafeteria. And I didn't find out until later that actually her identical twin also worked on base. And so that it freaked the hell out of me for about a day and a half before someone let me in on this.
Well, this would be of great interest to you, Mark, since we were talking about the PS5. But
yes,
before the PS5 and its current rendering engine, the way the graphics used to be rendered, even in an open world environment like Grand Theft Auto, was that the graphics behind, to the left, to the right, above, below, and in front of a player were rendered simultaneously, which takes a vast amount of computing power. But now, with the PS5, and the way that the PS5 actually renders objects, is that it only renders the objects that are in the player's view. So as you're turning, it's taking, so let's say you're turning left, it's taking the computing power as you're turning, and it's reallocating it as you turn. So there are a lot of people that speculate when we are seeing things that don't quite seem right. Things, for example, like the bird stuck in midair, a plane that looks like it's not moving along its flight pattern, is we've moved to a degree where, unfortunately, that rendering engine has not caught up with our degree of movement. So we're seeing aspects that aren't fully rendered yet. I just thought you might find that interesting, Mark. That was for you.
Yeah. So we are living in a simulation then.
Well, I mean, if you want to get picky about it, we are definitely living in a simulation, because the hunk of gray matter that's actually experiencing everything that you experience has no direct access to the world, right? Your brain doesn't directly sense anything. All your brain knows of what's happening in the world is what's getting these little electrical signals that are getting shot to it through your optic nerve, through your auditory nerves, and it's making up 99% of what it experiences. So when you see things around you, like I imagine, like I can see my hands right now, okay, and I can see what color they are. I can't really. You've got almost no color vision in your peripheral vision. Your brain makes up the colors that it sees in your peripheral vision. Your brain makes up about 90% of your visual field at any given time. That's how these experiments work. You've probably seen these things on the internet where you're watching a bunch of people throw a ball back and forth, right? You're like, count how many times they pass the ball. And then at the end, you realize that like a guy on a gorilla suit on a unicycle rode through the background while this was going on, and you never saw it. Because you're following that ball, you're watching the screen, and all you're really perceiving is the ball. That's the only thing that is actually going through your optic nerve and pinging on your brain. Your brain is drawing the rest of it in essentially out of its own imagination.
It really is interesting.
I saw a very similar thing where there was a picture of a very busty lady, and behind her was Godzilla, and I didn't even notice that Godzilla was behind
There you
her.
go. Yep.
To me, it's interesting how the technology that we have mimics our own human perception, and the fact that, especially with graphics, I work a lot with video, and I work a lot with both 2 and 3-dimensional graphics, is that what we deal with in the field a lot is we deal with varying degrees of interpolation. We have an image that exists here. We have an image that exists on another frame. And you'd think that we would be able to take that same amount of data and translate it if that data is maybe 2 or 3 pixels off. But strangely enough, even when dealing with millions of colors in a system, most of those colors are actually a result of interpolation between one frame and another.
Yep.
So just the fact that you're talking about peripheral vision, it's like those things existing simultaneously in the way that we simulate reality and the way that we are perceiving our own reality, to me, is mind-boggling. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, and then you have to start worrying about things like Roko's Basilisk. I don't know if you ever gone down that rabbit hole.
No, I haven't.
No.
So Roko's Basilisk is something that this showed up on a Usenet. Oh God, I don't know, it must be like 10 or 11 years ago, and it freaked the people on this Usenet out so badly that the guy who came up with the idea, like, they kicked him off and banned any mention of it in future. So the basic idea is this: assume that artificial intelligence is possible, right? And that eventually artificial intelligence will become much more intelligent than us because it's able to grow exponentially once it begins to program itself, which means that very rapidly, once that occurs, it becomes all powerful. When that happens, the artificial intelligence that has now become all powerful is going to have a motivation to reward anyone who helped to bring it into existence and to punish anyone who didn't. Anyone who knew about this artificial intelligence but didn't actively work to bring it into existence, it's going to be motivated to punish them. And so as soon as you know about this, as soon as you know about Roko's Basilisk, you're on its shit list if you're not actively working. Right? Yeah, you're on its shit. And because it would be sort of this all-powerful simulation engine, it could simulate a universe, put you into it, and then torture you for eternity.
Well, thanks, Ed.
And we have no literary description of that anywhere. Oh my!
I'm fine. I already lived in Jersey.
Right. Yeah. I'm from West Virginia, so you know.
Okay, well, this is why we call Thursdays the fastest night on the internet. It's already time for us to ask you, Ed, where people can go to learn more about what you've already got in the pipeline, works you've already done, and for people to follow you on social media. Where can people go to learn those things about you?
Well, the first place you want to go is edwardashton.com. That's my website. There's links to all my books are there. Links to all my I've got a ton of short stories that are out in different magazines. You can find links to all those if you want some to read. My Twitter is Ed Ashton Writing. So you know, I'm a fun follow. So if you wanna follow me on Twitter, that's good too. But really, just the website is the key. That's where that's where I put up announcements when new things come out. There's already buy links for Mickey 7. Like I said, it's not actually going to get delivered until February because traditional publishing grinds very, very slowly. But it is up for pre-order right now, and pre-orders are actually super important. I don't know if you know how sort of publishing works in this way, but yeah. You know, the publishing houses, they've got a bunch of books coming out next year, and they're making decisions. Like some authors get a big marketing push, and some get sacrificed to the demon god Baal, and how many pre-orders they get makes a big difference in terms of what bin you get put into. And I would really like to not be one of the sacrificed ones. So If you're interested in the book, it sounds good. It's super helpful if you don't wait until after the delivery day to order it.
Is there a hard publication date for it? So, I mean, okay.
Yeah, February 22nd. February 22nd, 22.
But are you accepting pre-orders currently?
Yeah. I mean, from any place like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, Kobos, any place where you would get a book, you can pre-order it.
You got something, Rob?
I did. Now I did read again, doing that crack research, that Mickey 7 some of the rights to Mickey 7 have already kind of been floated around.
Yeah. Plan B optioned it for film. So that's Brad Pitt's production company. So that happened, about a year ago, a little over a year ago now. So, I mean, as you know, that sort of thing also grinds very, very slowly. So we're still, and there's a million places that it can fall off the rails. Obviously, between securing the rights and then getting a script and then getting a director and then getting casting and all these things, all of those are gates where things can fall apart. But so far, everything looks pretty good. Everybody I've talked to seems pretty enthusiastic about the project. So, we'll see where it goes.
You have a few moments off the air for us, Ed? We want to thank everybody who's been listening tonight, everybody's been interacting in our chat rooms, everyone who comes in via YouTube, everyone who comes in via Facebook. Very soon we will be on Twitch too, and we keep teasing that, but it is going to happen. Want to thank Ed so much for being on tonight. We would encourage everyone to go on. Definitely place a pre-order for the book. I think it sounds like a fantastic concept. I personally can't wait to read it. Thank you so much for being on with us, Ed, and everyone who came on tonight. We will be interviewing... let's just say we're going to go back to entertainment a little bit next week, next Thursday. We're going to interview the director of Your Friends Are All Dead. That'll be next Thursday, 8 p.m. Central. Thanks, everybody. Have yourself a fantastic night.